Welcome to this unique session where we dive deep, where we navigate complexity into the heart of human rights and through the fine line of promoting responsible drinking. My name is Vedran Peršić, and I have a license to moderate. Okay, thank you. Tough crowd, okay, good. The concept of a social license to operate is no longer just about meeting minimum legal requirements. It's about trust, transparency, and demonstrating positive contributions to society. Today, we will explore how businesses can move from compliance to true impact, and what lessons different sectors can learn from each other. Sanela, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Mining is often highly scrutinized due to its environmental and social impact. How does Adriatic Metals approach security, long-term trust with local communities and balancing their expectations with investor and regulatory demands?
Well, thank you for having me on this panel, which I really am pleased to participate. Social license to operate is something that we are living day to day, every day in our project. We are in Bosnia since for more than 7 years, and we are the successful story, which I really want to share to everyone. Everyone is taking mining, as you said, scrutinizing mining only as a bad work, bad projects. We are actually evidence of successful and a good project, working together with local community for more than 7 years. The approach that we took is quite different and custom-made than the others. We didn't go on a high profile, profiling our company, what we are doing. We started on a really low-key, profiling ourselves through the community. We spoke with the villagers. We went from house to house, getting familiar with the people who actually live there.
But working in neighborhood.
Yeah, not like using that term, not in my neighborhood, which is really popular now in Europe. We actually been in a neighborhood 24/7, and we are still there. To operate in mining, you really have to be present. And one of the key goals that we took, and I think it's a success definitely, is visible management. So we had management and CEO on a site, living in that town, living in that neighborhood, so they know who we are. They can address their problems, they can address their issues. And we cannot deliver all the promises and fix all the problems in that society, but we are approachable. At least we can listen to them, and we can answer immediately. So there is no CEO sitting somewhere in the world, it's in Varas. And he has a residence and working permit visa. This is really important.
That's a good one. Julian, the alcohol industry faces increasing scrutiny, once again, another industry, due to public health concerns. How has the concept of social license evolved in your sector? And what proactive steps can companies take to enhance transparency and strengthen public trust?
Thank you, Vedran. So I'm the CEO of an organization called the International Alliance for Responsible Drinking. Quite a quaint name, but its purpose is anything but quaint. I represent the 13 largest beer, wine, and spirits companies in the world, so operating in markets all over the world in 180 countries. And the purpose of this organization was established for one very clear role, which is to defend the industry's social license to operate. Because these companies know that unless they do that, they will face regulation that would change their business model and change their ability to manage some of the largest, most successful brands in the world. And that is what's at stake here. So these companies are promoting responsibility, dealing with the big externality that this industry faces, which is the alcohol and health agenda, but they're doing it because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's absolutely essential for maintaining the sustainability of this industry. Unless these companies can show that they take responsibility for that externality, working with government, working with civil society, working with the United Nations, they risk losing that place as a responsible industry, as responsible companies, and then they'd face a very different business environment, which would transform their businesses and potentially destroy billions of dollars worth of brand value. So it's not just nice to have, this isn't just PR, it's actually essential, as the CEOs of these companies see it, for their business model and their sustainability. When I talk to them and ask them, what's the thing that keeps you awake at night? What's the thing you worry about most? This is what they worry about. They worry that they would lose that social license to operate and they would end up in a very different place from where they are now, which is the CEOs of companies that are worth trillions of dollars collectively, or at least they were before Trump's tariffs, and the CEOs of responsible companies with international brands, some of the best known in the world, from Johnny Walker to Bacardi to Heineken to Carlsberg. But they have those brands and the license to sell those because they have this position that they are maintaining, their social license to operate. We can get into the details of what that actually involves in terms of the role the companies play.
What is the role of IARD in that? What
so what IARD does, as for these 13 countries, we have some standards that these companies have all committed to. They're standards around not marketing or selling alcohol to minors. They're standards around promoting moderate consumption as opposed to harmful consumption. And they're standards around working with government, with regulators in support of statutory frameworks, but also going above and beyond as companies to do things that government or civil society can't do. So these companies collectively control marketing and advertising budgets of tens and hundreds of millions of dollars each year, and they can use that, and we are using that, to help build right across the value chain, whether it's with e-commerce platforms or digital marketing agencies, a new way of ensuring that when we're advertising online or when we're selling online, we're doing so in ways that protect minors, that ensure messages are being promoted about responsible drinking, and that we're avoiding selling in ways that would be irresponsible. And so it involves working from the digital world with the e-commerce platforms right the way through the hospitality industry to retailers to ensure that sales are done responsibly and that moderation is the message that we're all promoting. So we bring all of that together in a way that government or civil society couldn't, and we bring that to the collective effort.
Okay, thank you. David, thank you for having us in Porto, Montenegro.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's the third time, and hopefully we'll have many more to come. So.
Well, this place has transformed from luxury marina right now into a broader community, an economic hub, a place where politics meet business.
Oh, okay,
right?
Okay. Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
Inevitably, yeah.
How do you balance commercial development with long-term social and environmental responsibility, especially in the region with strong cultural and environmental heritage?
Okay, well, I guess I'm fortunate in that Mr. Alabar helped me out earlier on today, because many of the things that he explained about his own business are principles of our business. And I think that, firstly, I don't think our industry is particularly familiar with the idea of social license to operate. I mean, it's an incredibly important part for any large-scale developer that's developing communities rather than individual buildings, because you have to think a lot about how to create a community and how to fuse with the surrounding community. Otherwise, you'll fail. So it's incredibly important to do that. But I don't think it's sort of formalized in the way that a lot of industries operating under European regulation think of it. But it's totally inherent in everything that we do. So, I mean, as an example, I live in the shop, so I live in the marina, and I have plenty of people remind me of my responsibilities every single day on the way to work, on the way home from work, through the weekend, and in every evening. So I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But the point is, there's an ecosystem which tells us whether or not we're performing every day, and so. I would say in terms of sort of politics and business, I think on a subject like this, if you rely on regulation and political enforcement, then you failed before you started. So I think it's incredibly important for organizations like ours, and I think the Prime Minister was saying in the selection of partners in the future as well, to try and create alignment of values before you start. So try and work with people who have the basic values that you need to have to be successful to integrate into the existing community. So I think when I arrived here in 2000, late 16, but properly in 17, what I found was an incredible thing which had been started here. Wasn't a terribly integrated community. It didn't really exist as an extension of the town. It was early in its years of gestation, really, but also I think that there were some differences in value between where the project had come from and where we wanted it to go. So some very basic things happened almost subconsciously. One was we fundamentally, as an organization, as a group of developers now in the project, believe that people want to be where other people want to be. And so if you focus on how to achieve that, both in terms of living and visiting, then you're probably going to meet many of the tests that you need to meet in terms of a social license to operate. Because if you don't do that, then the result is that people reject you and they don't come. They don't come and buy your property, they don't come and stay in your hotel, and they don't come and walk your streets and shop in your shops. So I don't think we rely on being enforced or even encouraged by politics to do what's right. It's good business sense for us, as Mr. Alabar very eloquently described today. I mean, if our focal point were only profit, only immediate profit, then you wouldn't see many of the things that you see happening in this community that we're creating here. So, by being a place where other people want to be, I think one of the things we did was, instead of rewarding those people who were already investors in the project in a very exclusive way, in 2017 we began a journey where we turned that completely around in a way, and we started to invite people into the project rather than, to some degree, keeping people out. That brings its own challenges because it's a big cultural change for the people that live in the village here. But we believed it's the right thing to do, and economically and I believe socially, it's proved the right thing to do. Some people had moved away as a result of that because it's a much more public, much more populated, much more busy place than it was back in those days.
And the people are more engaged, right?
Well, people are engaged. I mean,
the ones that you brought, I mean, they're now more engaged.
Yeah,
they feel.
Actually, a very interesting thing, when I first arrived, somebody said to me, what's the biggest challenge going to be for you? And I don't know what they expected the answer to be. But my answer was the disappearance of the charismatic founding investors. That was my answer. And it was a true answer, because the project was founded by somebody who was a very charismatic, very strong individual with a big visual presence, Panama hat, linen suit, a legend in his own right. And suddenly, the project became owned by a sovereign wealth fund from far away. And so again, I don't know what they thought my answer was going to be, but they said, well, who's going to replace the founding investor? And I said, well, actually, it's the citizens who are going to replace the founding investor. And I don't think they expected that answer. And I didn't mean it in a crass way. I meant it genuinely, because the people that lived here already, both in the village and in the surrounding area, the people who were invested in businesses, people who were putting their children into the school, all of these people, for me, became the soul of the place, became the essence of the place for the long term, and that's a sustainable solution. A one-person solution is not a sustainable solution. And so we focused a lot on that, and in becoming more public as a project, we introduced a lot more sort of activities. People said to me, well, if you're going to invite a lot of people in, how are you going to make sure you bring the right people in and not the wrong people in? And my answer to that was, well, we'll just fill this place with activities that are unattractive to the people that we don't want to be here. We have a big music program, we have a big entertainment program, we now have a recording studio, a film studio. These things are really difficult to do and really difficult to create, to nurture, but they create a very inclusive environment. Lots of people participate, it's incredible. how many people who live in or around the project have turned out to be frustrated musicians or filmmakers or what have you, and now they're actually participating through us. We have a fantastic foundation with Milos Karadaglic, the classical guitarist from Montenegro, based in London, where we're now putting scholars through some of the best schools in Europe to help perpetuate this idea of infusion of culture and art into the project. And it makes good business sense to do that. So I think I was lucky. I spent a lot of my career in an organization which was very, very dedicated to these aspects of development, a company called Lend-Lease, which at one stage was the biggest developer in the world, biggest property company in the world, and they were Australian. And so 30 years ago, this wasn't something that you were required to do. It was something that the company that I grew up in, fundamentally believed in. They created a foundation. They seeded it with shares so that it was sustainable, and that foundation, grew all of these social activities within the staff, within the communities that we were developing in. And so I guess I've brought as much of that as I can, and I find that a lot of people are very motivated to participate in those things. It motivates the staff as well as the community. So truth of the matter is, we don't find conflict with politics, I don't think, when it comes to that subject. I think it's in our DNA, and it makes good business sense to be in our DNA. So,
David, thank you. Luke, from your experience working with global businesses, what government structures are most effective in ensuring companies move beyond compliance and embed sustainability in their core business strategies?
Yeah, thank you, Vaden. I think it's quite interesting to build on some of some of what we've been hearing, and perhaps just to say first that I founded 2050 21 years ago. I think we've been quite pioneering in developing corporate responses to human rights matters and to developing responsible business practices. We work with lots of large businesses, some of Julian's members as well, some construction, engineering, mining companies all around the world, to help them design practices that help them fulfill the growing actual number of international standards and expectations and even legislations to be responsible businesses. And what does that look like? Well, what's interesting about that, and part of my reflection here, is that there's a demand coming from policymakers and regulators onto companies. There's also a demand coming from investors and perhaps what we might call other international stakeholders to fulfill certain, whether they're standards, requirements, legislation, European legislation. We've seen a real growth in that over the last decade. And I think and yet the reality is that what Sanella described very well is that for a mining company on the ground, what stakeholder engagement, what social license to operate looks like is going around talking to your local communities and listening to them, and actually being a business that is valued, which I think David did very well explained. It actually becomes part of that local community and is valued by that local community, and the local community is therefore prepared to have you there and even invites you to be there. And so I see these two things. I think the question about governance is that companies have to find structures that help them to manage that demand, and there's from investors and expectations, and report to them, and to systematize what they're asking for so they can be confidently report with integrity to those investors, etc., and policymakers and governments. But they also have to systematize that but they also have to have a way of governing and monitoring what's going on at the local level. And in the biggest companies, that's quite evident. And you see that. And so, multifunctional groups, steering groups, whatever we want to describe them, they need to exist. They need to both be at that corporate global level and at that local level. At that local level, that means actually listening to what's coming from the various channels we have to our communities and making sense of that and adjusting and changing practices as a result. So that's that. But one area I wanted to flag and reflecting on some of the conversation this morning as well is that, you know, you're in an area where there's going to be a lot of growth and development, we hope, over the coming years. There's certainly an enthusiasm for it. And that means building things, lots of things. It means, sounds like it's going to be a dynamic decade ahead. And building things, be it real estate, be it as we heard earlier, opera houses, involves workers and people still in large numbers. And often that means bringing them in, whether it's just from a neighbouring village or whether it's from further afield. And certainly, you know, in the example of Dubai we heard this morning, those workers we know will often be coming from India, Nepal, Bangladesh. And so, you know, in my field, in our field, it's great to hear the stories of what's possible in terms of social responsibility when you have something built. But that doesn't offset the fact that you have got workers coming in and work, and the conditions you find the workers in terms of putting up that infrastructure. So, you know, and so things like, are they paid a living wage or are they just getting a bare minimum wage? Are they paying recruitment fees and being and then working at a low price and having to pay back those recruitment fees? So there's so I think, you know, this kind of, so the third area that I want to encourage us to think about in terms of governance is around procurement and supply chains. And that's often quite tricky for companies. Often the area, particularly contractors, particularly where you're bringing contractors onto site, and they might be bringing subcontractors, and it happens the same with miners. Somehow that often falls between a gap. Yeah? So there's a procurement team who find the contractors, who's looking at them on site? You know, look, is it the human resources team responsibility?
Look, from your experience, just follow up on
so
this
it's quite interesting. So I think those three areas for governance.
Based on your experience, is it good for a company, let's say company in Western Balkans, in Adria region, to have foreign workers or not? When it comes to social license, how it is perceived in the local community when they bring workers from abroad? Is that good for the license or bad?
It's tricky for the license to operate, is what I would say. So what we see with mining companies, I mean, it's inevitable that with a mine, you're often in a rural area and you need to bring workers into that area. That's called an influx. We know that and we know that with influx, there's various challenges. There is challenges on infrastructure. There could be challenges around schooling provision if they bring their families. If they don't bring their families, maybe there's other challenges about the fact that you've got a lot of men living together, perhaps with access to some of the products of Julian's customers, and not necessarily always behaving well after a few beers. And as a man, I can say we don't always behave well.
It's just speculation.
Yeah. So that influx is I think it's a reality.
Yes.
And I think it's also a reality that skilled or unskilled, the sheer numbers of resources required to build a big development like the one we're sitting in, and the skills required to build it are not going to be found in 200 yards down the road. So actually, it's a very relevant part of the challenge in managing a social license to operate.
However, if there's a little place like Tivat and you bring a doctor from London, for example, that's a positive thing. A brain surgeon here, you bring him from somewhere abroad, that's a good thing.
Can I jump in on your question? Because we have a really similar...
Julian, is that okay?
No, you go first, Sandra, and then I'll
Just to continue on this question, because we are the example. We are like having 540 employees, hundreds of them are expats, for instance.
Exactly.
So there was a little bit challenge between national and expat staff. But what we have done to kind of meditate as a management is to give opportunity to nationals to improve in their careers. So if you give them opportunities and they see the path, they know in 3-5 years' time, they will be a supervisor, they will become a mining engineers, or they will become a bosses or chief or GMs, then they will stay, and then you will have a normal relationship among the colleagues. And also, so opportunity and giving someone hope and right direction is actually the right way to kind of remove this bad blood, which can be in between national and expats, especially in the project of development or production.
No, that's a good case. Yes,
So
mentorship projects, mentorship programs
yes,
for
yes,
the locals.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
You wanted to follow up as well.
Thank you, Shannon. It's related to this, but it's picking up a point that you made, Luke, earlier, which is how much of social license to operate is local. It's about engaging the local communities, and it's about grassroots. And Sanal and David, you run businesses that are based in a location, and it's really, and you've been doing brilliant work at engaging your communities and building your social license to operate locally. And yes, you are bringing in international workers, but you're managing that locally. My companies have a problem, which is they're global. And so almost by definition, they're not local, they don't have those local connections. And so that is a challenge for my industry. The part of my industry that has perhaps the best position in that regard is actually not the brewers or the distillers, it's the winemakers, because they're much more local. They're part of the agriculture, they've got many small businesses who are connected to their communities and who the local communities see the value of. And that means that in those countries where my companies have a presence through those types of businesses, they have much more connection and much more social license to operate. And my different companies deal with that differently. I mean, AB InBev is a company that many of you may not have heard of, but it actually produces 25% of all of the beer in the world, over 30% by value. And the reason you haven't heard of it is actually because they're made up of 500 different brands, and their strategy is to stay local, to keep those brands local, to keep investing locally, to keep local businesses with local management and local workers, and make sure they are connecting with the local authorities and showing that they're not just some anonymous global corporation, but they're actually rooted in the communities and building jobs and building value, and also building out beyond just production and profit for the company, but actually showing that they are contributing to the community. And the best feedback is from that community. But it's a challenge these companies have, because actually the best social license to operate is something that you gain locally.
Yeah, this winemaking example is a really good one, because it has its own, seasons when you grow wine, when you pick wine, pick grape, make wine. When in brewing, I know that I have a friend who they're producing beer, and they're telling me that they buy wheat somewhere on the market, and they produce their beer every 3 weeks. That's homemade, some stuff, but it's good. It doesn't matter. But for the winemaking, it's totally different, and I really like that story. We are talking about engaging local community. Let me engage local audience. Thank you, guys. I mean you. So, on the screen, we should have a QR code. If there is no QR code, you can raise your hand and you can ask your question. So don't be afraid. I encourage you to ask questions. Yes, the guys listening. Let me come back on engaging with local communities. Sanala, what are the most effective mechanisms for engaging affected stakeholders and ensuring their voices influence decision-making? So what are the best cases that you can
Well, I always go back on the practice, because if you don't practice and see what's happening on the field, you don't know how to achieve it. You can write the beautiful papers, but if they're not in a practice, you don't know how that works.
Yes.
We started 3 years ago with a public committee, so engaging all the representatives from the major villages and the town and the canton, because Bosnia is really divided between 4 levels of government. So participating every month or every second month about really serious topics. So we are all here, like they're sitting, management is sitting like we are sitting, they're in the audience and they can ask whatever they want and they can address all the problems. That really works because you always take the note, you know what's wrong in that month. Is it a flood? Is it a mud? Is it a dust? Is it a noisy trucks? Is it some crazy driver driving 70 per hour in a town? You know that, and you can react immediately. And if they see respond, because you respond immediately, then they calm down, and then second thing arrives as a second question. So you don't have a frustration in a local community that none of those questions are resolved. So we kind of removed frustration locally because we respond immediately. That works also. Also engagement with what would really help with public companies. So we engage public companies to do commercial jobs for us because they were always in the problems, in the bankruptcy, without money. So they have a license. They can operate also as a companies. So we invite JKP Vares, we call that. It's like some company, public company who is working, have a license to remove the mud, to clean the roads, to maintain something around the mine. It really helps. Then those people who are working there, talking how they're being engaged and recognized by the foreign company and having the opportunity to grow.
Excellent.
So you really have to be on site and recognize opportunities, how to react to the locals. Also, what we've done is when we were in a construction stage, we decided to give opportunity to local companies in a canton. So you cannot find the companies for the construction not in Vares or wider, but let's say in the level of that Zenica Doboj canton. And we spent more than 130 million euros hiring contractors from Zenica Doboj canton, which means we gave a lot of money back into community to grow those companies together with us. So now they're really strong. They are competitive. They can go to work for 5C corridor or other projects, infrastructure projects. So this is the impact that you're doing as a mining, because I always said mining is not just building a mining, it's like building a state. Because you have a various concept of where you have to influence in a community.
Thank you, Sanla. Yeah. I've been to Vares. It's a small town, 5,000 inhabitants, deep in mountains. It's cold over there in June. And there is snow over there in June.
Today is snowing.
But coming back on the coast, David, could you share some examples, just to follow up on this, could you share some examples of stakeholder engagement that shifted your business?
I guess in terms of what we build, how it looks, how it's laid out, we benefit from a fairly prescriptive planning system here. So, you know, there is a location study, a zoning plan that tells you what you can and can't do in quite a lot of detail. And there's a very defined process of approval for outline permissions for development and then for detailed permissions. So whilst some people either miss that process or don't realize, because it's not everybody that can read drawings, and some people, you know, still get a surprise when something's developed and they sort of either weren't aware or didn't quite understand what it was going to be. But we do have the benefit of having, you know, a system which is increasingly more democratic in the country. There's increasingly more consultation in the development of those control plans and so on. And that's good because it's a very complex task for a large project. So, the development side of the project is quite controlled in that way. The operational side, there are no real guidelines. I mean, of course, there are lots of rules and laws and bylaws as to what you can and can't do, but the truth of the matter is that you can choose on any day of the week whether you have a pop concert or or an antiques show or whatever you want to do. So in terms of what the place is like, what you experience on a daily basis, what's interesting is that most of the time, the things that you want to do to activate the place, you actually reach out to the community for that content, actually. There's phenomenal musical talent even in the municipality, let alone in the wider country. You actually reach out and you end up spending a lot of time talking to people about what you should and shouldn't do and how to do it with the people that actually provide that for you. A little bit like hiring local contractors. I mean, we have over 500 staff if you consider the shipyard as well, and well over 85%, probably over 90% of those are local people. We've got 3 generations of many families working within the organisation. You get a lot of opportunity to consult, a lot of opportunity and a lot of comment that comes in from people. So ours is because a constantly self-perpetuating process of engagement, and then at a more commercial level, we're starting, because we actually have a very big retail business here now. Believe it or not, the retail business is bigger in monetary terms than the marina. And so now we have a whole community of businesses that we want to succeed, and so we're starting to build a better framework of consultation, communication with those businesses, so that we can all succeed together. So it's quite a formal process on the development side, and a much more organic process when it comes to the day-to-day operation of what you experience in this place and how it interacts with others. But so many of the operators, so many of the staff, so many of the suppliers in the operational phase of the project are local, that we have a tremendous amount of engagement through that process anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about transparency in engaging public, local communities, but what to do when you lose the trust? Luke, do you want to start? What company can do when they lose trust?
When you lose trust? I mean, actually, I'll take license of speaking to say that I think Sunela and David have given 2 very good examples of what you might call community panels, community engagement panels, which, are good. Those sort of formal structures are very helpful in terms of, maintaining that dialogue in a systemized way with your local communities, which means that when the shit does hit the fan, actually often companies with those practices in place find that they know who the local community is and who to go directly to answer your question. B, they've built up some trust already. And so that generally means they're given a bit more leeway in terms of handling a crisis. So, I'm thinking about a German pharmaceutical company who had a fire at one of their facilities in Germany, and one of the things they said to me after that was, well, thank goodness, we weren't really sure why we had that panel in place, and it's been hard to justify keeping it in place over the years, but my goodness me, didn't it come into its use at the point when we really needed it, because we'd built those relationships and we had those relationships. And I guess, I think that it's much more difficult where you have lost trust, or you haven't built that trust, you haven't made that effort to build that trust in the first place, then you have an incident, then where do you start from? So I think you've got to sort of see this as kind of proactive.
You go back on sharing information.
And probably the reality is, if you haven't
through all the steps,
haven't got that in place, then you're going back and really starting from building from the base up again and trying to re-establish that trust.
We live in an age when information is available everywhere. I mean, just go online and it's over there. Julian, in your area, we can say that customers are really informed about everything when it comes to health concerns and everything. So in your experience, what are the most effective ways companies are enabling consumers to make those responsible choices? And how IR is helping its members to do that?
So, I mean, one of the things that the companies are committed to is selling their products responsibly. And they have, collectively, they have, they're amongst the biggest advertisers and users of marketing in the world, these companies. So they have enormous potential reach, and they are able to communicate to their consumers better than anybody else. I mean, they have fine-tuned that over years and decades, and they communicate globally, and they communicate imaginatively. They hire some of the best creative marketing and advertising talent to help them do that. So in a way, they have a connection with their consumers, and their consumers are measured in the hundreds of millions all over the world, and they communicate locally in different markets. It's very it's sophisticated and it's imaginative. What they do as part of that is bring in the responsibility messaging. So they run responsibility campaigns. I mean, you may have seen some of the campaigns that Heineken runs, for example, on their drink driving campaign, for example. Very imaginative. They bring in Max Verstappen, the Formula One driver. It's witty, it has impact. They're also developing products that actually give people choices, like the zero alcohol beers. And they're bringing that together, communicating their consumers messages that are around responsibility, but also doing so in a way that are impactful, that connect with their consumers, that allow them to see that through those brands, you can both drink responsibly, you can get different products that allow you to not drink alcohol, but to drink your favorite beer. It's very impactful, and the data shows, and the marketing data shows, that this is what actually lands with consumers, lands with citizens, and it's one of the things that the industry brings to this sort of multi-stakeholder approach that's enshrined at the United Nations level, the whole of society approach. It's something that our companies can do, that communication with consumers, with citizens, that actually civil society and government can't do on that scale. And the job of the companies is to make sure they're putting in the responsible messaging that is delivering that public good, that responsible messaging, reaching citizens that governments are looking for. And that, I guess, is part of our version of a social license to operate. It's retaining the confidence and the trust of governments and in the United Nations framework that we're going to play our part in bringing those resources to bear to achieving that responsible outcome.
I found online some data that shows that even the World Health Organization noticed that there is a decline in harmful drinking in the last decade, something around 20%. So these messages are making some effect on society across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, this is a framework that's run at the UN level. The World Health Organization plays a role in it. As you say, they collect the data. And one of the key bits of data is the harmful use of alcohol and the impact it can have. And the worst impact it could have is it could lead to mortality. So there's something called alcohol attributable mortality. That's come down by 20% since 2010. So there's progress. There's definitely more to do. There's more that the industry can do. But being part of that approach, working with government, with the UN, with the whole World Health Organization, is central to these companies' social license to operate. They need to operate locally and build those community relations that David and Sana and Luke have talked about. But they also need to maintain that confidence and trust with those governments in the markets around the world, the 180 countries around the world where they operate to.
Thank you. Sanela, as we're closing almost, what is the one major concern about the future that gives you nightmares?
Well, actually, this is why this kind of conferences exist. This is why I'm so happy that Biljana invited me to be the part of this Adria ESG Summit, is to share the knowledge. My worst nightmare is misinformation and not having knowledge about what we are actually talking about, what we are doing. Mining is scrutinized, like you said in the beginning, because people do not understand what we are actually doing and what we are producing. So I'm constantly repeating myself on each panel that I'm attending, that we are producing critical minerals for your better life, for that green agenda that we want to achieve. Without critical minerals like silver, zinc, copper, you can't do it. It's just nothing. It's not doable.
Yeah,
so, exactly. You like your iPad. You want another one. We all now want iPhone 16, right? It is a huge demand for this critical minerals resources, but actually no one is doing anything, and we are all acting like it's coming from space. Maybe space mining is the option also. Yeah. The fact is, Europe today needs 10 new mines, 15 new process plants, and 50 new recycle projects now, today, to reach that demand and to reach the European Critical Mineral Acts until 2030. It is really worrying me that it's not achievable because you cannot get any permits according to the unknowledge and misinformations sharing publicly about mining or construction. Doesn't matter, it's similar. We are in similar problems. So that's my worst nightmare, that will continue in the media through some not sharing proper informations and true. I always like repeating education, education, education 3 times. Ask me what that means. I will, with all of you, sit down and explain what you need to know.
And your message is heard. There's a question from the audience. Thank you, audience, whoever it was. Do you encourage studying on mining universities in Bosnia and Herzegovina or abroad?
Absolutely.
When it comes to Gen Z? That was the question.
Oh, that's a great question, because actually we restarted a minor underground class in Varas after 30 years. Mm-hmm. So we spoke with the Ministry of Education in the canton Zenica, and we were like, please, can you reopen that class? We will talk with the parents in Varas. They can put their children, we will give them opportunity to work for us after 4 years. And of course, we signed the agreement with all universities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, both entities that are producing young engineers, metallurgy, mining engineers, to have first practice in our mine, and then the best one have opportunity to work for us.
Okay, thank you. David, what is one area in your work where you recognize the most need for improvement?
I think leaving aside, the kind of issues of taste and preference on shapes and sizes of buildings and things, I think it has to be the single biggest issue for us. Has to be recyclability of products and materials. I mean, if you look at all the critical minerals that you're talking about, you look at the base metals and things that you want an iPhone 16, but all the materials that you need are in your iPhone 15. So it's much more difficult in construction because the product lasts longer. It's a long way from a fast-moving consumer good. So therefore you don't throw off as much recyclable material. Do you
want to expand? What is your future plan?
Oh, sorry?
Your future plans for the Porto Montenegro?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, to expand? I mean, most people don't realize that we've only developed about 50% of the land area and less than 50% of the built-up area that's within the total zoning. So for us, we're only halfway through the journey. So that means that how we do the other 50%. The first 50% was just getting yourself on the map, getting started under almost impossible circumstances to reach where we have. The next 50% needs to be doing it better. Needs to be doing it more sustainably, and so that if we can find one way one area to improve, I think it's in what we build our buildings from, and how we equip them, and how much of that, knowing more about where that's coming from, rather than, unfortunately, what happens is people concentrate on speed and lowest cost, and you need to develop a technique for also being able to think a bit more about what it is that you're using, rather than just how much it's costing, and how quickly you obtain it. Yeah.
Thank you. Luke, as you can see, we are almost at the end. What are your final thoughts on building?
Well, I was worried you were going to ask me the same question, what my my nightmare is.
So you have
I've
nightmares.
been thinking, well, how am I going to answer that question?
Yeah.
And
how would you answer that question?
And actually, where my head went to is we've heard, I think, today a number of different inputs on politics and politicians, including a call for politicians to be kind of responsible and to take their position in society. And I thought, so I was reflecting on that, and I was reflecting on the fact that my life over the last 6 months, and I'm sure colleagues' lives in business, has been significantly more complex thanks to the machinations of both what's been going on in Brussels about debate about regulations, and particularly regulations that affect large companies, corporate sustainability due diligence directive included, and there's also what's going on across the pond in the US at the moment. And so, actually that sort of political turmoil, for want of a better, or turmoil created by, is actually perhaps the nightmare, because it doesn't allow for good businesses to get on and focus on what we've heard today in terms of good practices. And it creates a lot of noise in the system. It makes decision-making difficult. It makes resource allocation difficult to know where to put your bets. So that, for me, felt like my nightmare.
Julian,
hopefully,
do you want
to
answer the nightmare question?
Well, I might turn it around and actually say what I think these companies
to make
really
it
should be doing more of.
Yes.
And I think, and it's the flip side maybe of their nightmare, which is that people might think that actually drinking their products, even moderately, is bad for them. They should stop doing that. That's a nightmare for people who sell many fine products, but think that their market might shrink over years. I think the thing that they need to do is to be more confident about telling the story about how their products, drunk responsibly, drunk better, are part of so many important parts of people's lives. They're part of a good life, they're part of a better life, they're part of a social life, and that in moderation, they've been part of our societies, part of our communities, not just for decades, but for thousands of years, and that they are the stewards of that going forward, but this is something that actually is positive as well. And so being able to show responsibility, but also positivity, and being more confident about that. And I think that is their best answer to perhaps their biggest nightmare. I'll finish there.
Yeah, let's just remember that the famous speech doesn't start with this is my nightmare, but I have a dream. Just a final thought, question for everybody, and I'll start with Sanela. In your industry, if you could find identify three terms or words that will the best explain the coming 5 years, the next decade, let's say. 3 words to best explain coming decade in your line of business.
Well, mining, like I said, influence life. So it's a life. Then it's a word of opportunity and hope, because people need to see there is a hope.
Okay.
And also certainty. We love to share that we will stay there for 20 years. We're not going in 5 years' time. We will stay there for 20, 30 years, and we will just develop and build.
Okay, thank you.
Is that an answer?
Yes.
I guess I think that's part of what, we've been talking about place-based companies in particular, but I think part of the shift we'll see is that companies need to make a move from where they have been managing, if you like, their social license from the perspective of being allowed to do what they want to do, to a model where they actually see themselves, as we're beginning to hear, as an active part of the community, and start thinking about how they help in that community to transition also in the face of climate change. And I think we'll start to see a sort of, societies beginning to say, well, we'll have you here if you're helping us enough with that challenge, as well as development and other challenges.
And your 3 words are?
That was my 3 words.
David?
I'll shut up and leave it to David now.
Probably the number 1 would be consciousness. I think just not blindly doing what you've been doing before, or doing it as fast as you can without knowing what the implications are of what you're doing, and whether there's a better way to do it. I think technology and artificial intelligence is probably hugely useful to us all, particularly us, in very rapidly and very easily being able to ask what are otherwise very difficult, very time-consuming questions about what happens when I do this. So consciousness for me would be 1, rather than just sort of being in a coma as you crash through business. I think care somehow at every level. So care, and it sounds a little bit soft, but it's not. I mean, if you have in your DNA a genuine desire to care for places, people, things, then you will build. For me, we build better and more valuable communities by doing that. And I think it's in a world which is increasingly apparently careless. I think it's a real competitive advantage if you have that, and you can tell people that you have it. And I suppose what would be the third? The third would be speak out. Would be you had to have a voice. If you've got something to say about your industry, about the politics that affects your industry, I think you need to have a platform on which you can share your experience and your observations with people who quite often don't know, particularly in the political sphere, as Prime Minister was saying. They really have no experience. They really don't know what the consequences of some of the things that they're doing are. So you need to have a good accessibility to
courage if you want another C.
Yep.
If you want a 3rd C, courage. Speaking of courage.
Yeah, every day, every day.
Thank you, Julian.
4 words, but I'll explain them. Wow. So I think it's drinking less but better, and my companies will be supporting that, whether it's through providing wonderful premium products, single malt whiskies, or by offering them very tasty zero alcohol products like Heineken 00. So there is a future, a bright future for those companies in the drinking less but better, and that's the future.
Excellent, thank you. My 3 words are resilience. You showed it, and I think everybody noticed it. Second one is gratitude. Thank you very much for your time, your knowledge, and experience. Thank you, all of you, for staying here and being with us. And my 3rd word is lunch.
Yes.
Lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah. Thank you. Well done.